The whole way that this parsha came about, I even get emotional thinking about it. Normally, I start looking at my notes earlier in the week, but I just, like Brittany was iterating last week, you just really don't get a conclusion till sometime Thursday or Friday, and then maybe by the time you get up on a Sabbath morning, you're ready. Well, Yahweh began to speak into my heart about this particular Torah portion Monday, and some profound things began to just leap off of the pages of the scripture and just begin to shake me on the inside. And I believe that this Torah portion is a picture of the body of Messiah, just like all of them are. But there's something that's going on in this particular Torah portion this week. As I began to delve into it, I was asking him questions. A lot of the people that I started out in the ministry with, they're gone, falling by the wayside. A lot of people, for whatever reason, they come in like I've said this before, sort of like a tumbleweed. They blow in and blow out, and they leave a little evidence that they were here, and then they go on. There's no legacy left behind. And here we are as a group of people. We're talking about a greater exodus. We're anticipating, if I'm hearing right, and I believe you will agree with me, we're anticipating a coming exodus that's going to catch out that company of believers and carry us into a place in Him to where we're going to see a manifestation of His deliverance and His redemption like we've never seen. Do y'all believe that? Well, if that's the case, then I want to know what's wrong. That happens to be in my notes. Many are called, few are chosen. I guess you must have read them. My point is that the body of Messiah, as I'm looking at it, and maybe it's something in me, and I think that this is what he was doing in preparing me for this Torah portion, because as soon as he began to speak these things into me, into my spirit, man, I came under such a physical attack. I was literally on my back for 3 days. Didn't finish until late yesterday and still couldn't really make good sense of what the notes were. But I believe that he's working in us to change. And I believe he's wanting us to come out of Egypt and not repeat the mistakes that our forefathers repeated. And I believe that he wants us to come out and not have to go 40 years of wandering before we're able to achieve the promise that has been ours for multiplied generations. And yet, I'm seeing people that get so caught up in frivolous circumstance, little bitty attacks, little things that just, common to everyday lifestyle. And when those things come, we get overwhelmed and we want to quit. And then we want to blame Yahweh. We want to blame everybody else in the ministry. We want to blame everybody else around us. And there's no... Maybe this is not a good term, stickability. Where is that anymore? Where's the stickability? Where's the individuals that can stand with you when you know that you're about to go into a pitched battle and you know that you don't have to worry about your back, that you can trust Abba to send people into the midst of the fray with you? Where are those individuals at? Well, as I'm looking at this Torah portion, and please bear with me, because I believe that you'll see some things in here that will be an indictment served against us. The title of the Torah portion is Bishlach. Comes from Exodus chapter 13, verse 17, through chapter 17, verse 16. And that phrase, Bishlach, is translated when he let go. And it's kind of anticlimactic if you look at it in the grand scheme of things, because we're on the heels of the plagues that fell on the house of Egypt. You see the firstborn destroyed of Pharaoh, and then the children of Israel are going out. And it's almost as if this is kind of an anticlimactic thing, that the dust is beginning to settle. But yet, when you read in that phrase, when he let go, it's indicating that Pharaoh's the one that's made the decision here. And I understand that Yahweh's sovereign. But we have to understand also that Pharaoh was the sovereign of Egypt. And not only was he king of Egypt, but he was also the God of Egypt. And so there's more going on here behind the scenes in this phrase, bishalak, when he let go, than what you can look at just on the surface. It actually originates from the Hebrew word shalak. Say that with me, shalak. It indicates to send away, to dismiss, to cast out, and to be divorced. And if you look at that prefixed letter bait at the front of it, the bait indicating the house or the wife, and putting it in its proper context, what you have here is a legal transition that's actually taking place in the course of the lives of the children of Israel, Pharaoh, and Yahweh. What's happening here is that while we see Yahweh extricating his bride out of Egypt, you also are seeing, because it says when he let go, it indicates that Pharaoh is also doing something to terminate a relationship. Pharaoh is divorcing his former bride. He's divorcing the house of Israel. And if you understand ancient Near Eastern custom, in particular in Egypt at that particular time, if a man divorced his spouse, he had to return the bridal dowry, and he had to pay a fine, which gives you an indicator of why the children of Israel were able to spoil Egypt on their way out. How many of you are looking forward to Pharaoh divorcing you? Listen to me carefully, because that comes with a price. Because everything that had been comfortable to the house of Israel was ensconced in that lifestyle for generations, multiplied generations. And now all of a sudden, everything that had been dear to you, everything that had been comfortable to you, everything that had been the foundation that your regular lifestyle was built upon, that's shaken and challenged. And if you'll be honest with me, nobody likes challenge, right? Just one person. Nobody likes to be challenged. And so what I find in looking at this Torah portion, it seems to me that Father is allowing some things to happen here to give us an indicator as the people that are facing a greater exodus and a confrontation with a future Pharaoh, that we're going to have to get prepared for another encounter just like this. So I want to put it in a proper framework. That word shalak, which can be translated as divorce, to put someone away, is first seen in the relationship between a husband and wife in Genesis chapter 3, verse 23, when Yahweh puts forth or divorces the man from Eden. And then in the next verse, he emphasizes it even greater, because he says he drove him out, and that word is garash, and indicates an even a more powerful intent to separate the man. And so you see, again, the same thing happening, because Adam and Eve breaks the covenant relationship. Yahweh divorces them. And look what happens. The dowry, the bridal price, is paid again in Ephesians chapter 4. And someone had to pay the penalty, and that became the debt that the Messiah took on for us. And as I was looking at this, I'm thinking, well, we're about to follow the same pattern again. We're about to go into a situation as a company of believers where it's incumbent upon us to learn how to walk the relationship out on a consistent daily basis and not be up one day and down the next. Does that make sense to you? And what I find in looking at most people in their relationship, it seems to me that what's happening here with Israel is an indicator of where we're at, then we need to go back and begin to get a little bit more of an idea of what was going on, so I can see that I don't make these same mistakes. And so it seems plausible, and it helps to kind of put the future actions of Israel into a better framework. You have 430 years of bondage. And let me just share this with you. How many in here, and you don't have to raise your hand if you want, how many in here believe that you've been saved and set free? Did you know spiritual bondage can end just that quickly? Their spiritual bondage ended just that quickly. But there was something that was still going on in the side of the house of Israel that needed to be changed. And here's where I believe is a major disconnect. There are mindsets and habits personal traits and characteristics that we cultivate having been inside a slave-type mentality for all these generations. And until you change your body, you can get instantly spiritually set free, but you're going to still be a slave to the flesh. Does that make sense to you? And so the picture that you see here, in my opinion, as Israel is making that transition throughout the 40-year journey, they're constantly bickering, murmuring, moaning, and complaining, and yet they're espoused to the Creator. And so it sounds to me as if you have an unsatisfied bride who's looking back over her shoulder at her former lover, and it takes her 40-something years to get her flesh under control before she can actually be able to reach out and take hold of the ketubah's promise, the inheritance. Do you see that? Does that make sense to you? And so what I'm seeing as I was looking through it, this is one of the major problems that Israel had throughout their history. They were constantly murmuring, constantly complaining, and I'm going to share this with you. Your murmuring and your complaining really exposes the heart of the individual. And if you're one of those individuals that has that kind of a character, if you're constantly murmuring and bickering and complaining, you need to stop long enough and listen to me. I'm not trying to point fingers at anybody, because I have issues with these things as well, and this is something Father's been speaking to me about. But nobody has to tell me when I've got a bad attitude. Nobody has to tell me when my attitude stinks. And all the time I hear the Holy Spirit speaking to me, telling me, yeah, you got a stinky attitude. Check your attitude. And it's interesting, because this is what I see happening here. That attitude exposes the heart towards the husband. And I believe with everything that's inside me, that what I was trying to teach us throughout this whole discourse, this Bishlach, when he's trying to take and make the transition from a bride who had been espoused to Pharaoh, king of Egypt, all the fleshly carnality things that had went along with that, and transition her to learn how to walk in holiness and righteousness, and just like we were singing, to demonstrate the power and majesty of His Word. And yet all I can do the moment that I get tested is murmur and complain. And if I'm not mistaken, I'm told in Mark chapter 4 regarding the parable of the sower, that persecution and affliction arises for the word's sake, not because of who I am. The devil has no problem with you. He doesn't care who you are. He moves and attacks and pressures you because of the word that's on the inside of you. Is that making sense to you? And so if we don't learn how to get these things under control, so that when we are in a pressing situation, we will never be able to be the bride that Abba called us to be. And listen to me, I don't want to be responsible for part of the generation dying off. It's one thing for me not to achieve my inheritance. It's another thing for me to be a hindrance to keep someone else from achieving it. Am I right? And I know, while I was sitting here putting these notes together, every time I've heard these Torah portions taught, I always hear people say, man, if I'd have been where they were, if I had seen the miracles, if He had sent me a deliverer, if we'd seen all of the plagues demonstrated, if we'd seen all of those miraculous things, if we had just been able to walk across the Red Sea on dry land, I would never have made the mistakes that those folks made. And yet here we are, we're looking back. Messiah's come and paid the penalty for us so that we're not under the curse of the law any longer. We can live according to the Spirit, not after the flesh, and yet our lifestyle is an indicator that there's something inherently wrong inside of us, and yet we're expecting, as I say, a greater exodus. And as I was preparing this, Father began to take me back to Galatians chapter 5, and I'm going to break this. I've looked at Galatians chapter 5 probably 1,000 times, and I've seen some things here in these 17 works of the flesh. And listen to me. The children of Israel were having to deal with these 17 works of the flesh. And I believe with all my heart, just like the gifts of the Spirit, 9 gifts of the Spirit, I believe that these 17 works of the flesh, that the numbers are there for a specific reason. Yahweh didn't just say, well, there could have been 15, maybe 19. Let's go work something out in the middle. Let's choose 17 works of the flesh. I believe that they're there for a reason. And so I went back and I was looking at it, and I want you to listen to me. When you look at it in the King James English, it really doesn't give you an indicator of what is really below the surface. Listen to this. Now the works of the flesh are manifest, which are these: adultery. Everybody understands what adultery is, right? Fornication. Everybody should understand what that is. But in the Greek language, that word porneia also indicates that fornication can include pornography. And let me just share this with you. Based on statistics, 95% of the males that call themselves believers at one time or another have problems with pornography, and almost that amount of females have. But that would never affect me. Uncleanness. Listen to this one. Lasciviousness. The word lasciviousness in the Greek language literally indicates this. This blew my mind. It paints a picture of an individual who spends too much. Now, before you get on to me, listen to what I got to say. Of him laying out his expenditures on a more magnificent scheme than his means will warrant. And when that happens, that individual slides easily under the fatal influence of flatterers and of all those temptations with which he has surrounded himself, into a spending on his own lusts and appetites of that with which he parts so freely, laying it out for the gratification of his own sensual desires. Lasciviousness takes on a different mindset now, doesn't it? Paints a different picture. Because when we start gratifying our own sensual lusts and desires of the flesh, it paints a picture that you don't normally see. Idolatry, witchcraft. You've heard this before. It's the word pharmakia, but it's translated as meaning drugs and magical arts. But did you know that witchcraft can also include sorcery? And sorcery is when you use magical incantations to speak evil against another. Well, we would never have that in the Hebrew roots community. Now, I'm trying to set the tone here for you to understand what the children of Israel were dealing with when they were leaving Egypt. You want to find out what cost them 40 years of wandering and kept them from entering into the promised land? You better pay attention to what's being read here in Galatians chapter 5. Because I don't want to fail. Look at this word for hatred and variance. The word for variance is eris, and it means strife, contention, and quarreling. When did we ever have any quarreling and strife and contention in the Hebrew roots community? In fact, that's why we stopped calling ourselves Messianics, because we got so fond of saying we're messy. And because of our messy antics, nobody wants to have anything to do with us. Why? Because we bicker and we're constantly contending and striving and quarreling with one another. And then you have the phrase emulations. And it comes from the Hebrew word zelos, which means jealousy, and then wrath. Look at this. Wrath is translated from the Greek word thymos, which means uncontrollable anger. Nobody in here's probably ever had any trouble with that. But I was one of those kind of individuals, and still by times have to keep water close by to keep the fire put out, because I'm one of those kind of individuals, if you poke me through the fence, I will bite. But there's a difference between righteous indignation and the kind of uncontrollable wrath that a lot of us are prominently visited with, that causes us to get out of control and say things and hurt people's feelings and bring that into the house. There's a lot of marriages where the husbands and wives are constantly dealing with that uncontrollable anger, strife, and contention. This is in Galatians chapter 5. This is a New Testament perspective of what the children of Israel were dealing with before they left Egypt. And if you don't want to spend 40 years, I'm going to share something with you. You got to get out of Egypt first. Are you listening to me? And I'm going to just be really plain. The vast majority of the people that call themselves believers are never going to leave Egypt. And I can prove it to you. Strife. Erythea. Listen to this. That's an individual who courts distinction or favor, one who's self-promoting. He likes to have his ego stroked. Never would do that. Never would be self-promoted. We used to call them horn tooters back home. You know, they get up in front of everybody and toot their own horn. Seditions. That word means dissension and divisions. Heresies. Oh, when I saw this, when you hear the word heresy, you usually think from the King James English that it means spreading something that's kind of from an occultish background, but it actually indicates that you're one of those that's guilty of gathering others for your own division so that you can use them to help foment that. Envyings. Phanos. Being spiteful and envious. Nobody would ever say, I've had a problem with that in this house, would they? Murders. Same root as the word for envyings. And listen to me. You don't have to physically kill a man in order to be guilty of murdering that individual if you're one of those kinds of folks that has the ability to go around and with your envy and your strife and your discord and your backbiting and you're constantly saying things to demean someone and bring that into the house, and then you gather other people around to help you with that division and strife. He goes on to say, drunkenness, revelings and such like, of the which I tell you before. Listen to this. You want to know why the children of Israel, first of all, didn't come out of Egypt they should have, and then second of all, why they didn't make it? As I have also told you in time past, they which do such things shall not inherit the kingdom of Yahweh. You want to know why the children of Israel didn't ascertain the promise? You want to know why they wandered around for such a long period of time? You want to know why they had difficulties and trials and problems? You want to know why the first generation died off except for two individuals? Only two individuals of that first generation made it to access the inheritance. And there are a lot of different statistical numbers thrown around. Some say as many as 6 million, some say 600,000. And if you had just 600,000 and only two made it in from that original group, something's wrong. And Yahweh uses the numbers. He doesn't just take numbers here and use them to fit this scenario and numbers here to make them fit this one. Those numbers are practical. They're there as teaching mechanisms and teaching tools to show us, yes, the same percentage rate that was applied there is also applicable here, but many are called and few were chosen. You've got a decision to make. The children of Israel had a decision to make. Your difficulties, how many of you have been going through difficulties lately? How many of you have had some trials and problems? Did you know that all of those expose the Egypt that's in you? Okay? And that's okay because you want the Egypt out, right? But the interesting thing about it is that the time that you spend wandering around and around trying to get set free from that reveals exactly how much the freedom that Yahweh has purchased for you really means to you. What happens is that we get so caught up in all of these things that's going on around us that we become enamored with it. We get comfortable. Listen to me, I know people that literally get comfortable in being miserable. And they're comfortable in being talebearers. And they're comfortable in bringing strife and division. And I've known husbands and wives that spent their entire marriage constantly bickering. The only thing that they had in common that kept them together was that they fought with each other so much that they knew nobody else would have them. And it's sad. How long does it take before I realize, I can make a change here? And while I was looking at this, I thought, there's something going on. 17 works of the flesh back there in Galatians. Maybe there was a connection to Joseph being 17 years old when he goes down into Egypt. Is it possible that number 17, those 17 works of the flesh, and if you study Joseph's lifestyle, it's evident that Joseph had the earmarks of those things working in him. And so Joseph, he had to go down it. And Joseph is a shadow picture of Messiah. And so like Messiah, Joseph took on those things. And so Joseph walked through that first before the rest of the children of Israel walked through it. Listen to me. These things are part of the lifestyle. Pastor John was saying earlier how much he found the power of the spirit realm of late really was. And I'm telling you, we put the blame on the spirit realm when I'm convinced that the vast majority of it's here in my flesh. And if I can get my fleshly man under control where I'm not prone to these vestiges of the flesh, then the enemy has nothing in me to work with. Does that make sense to you? I want to show you something I believe Yahweh's trying to teach us in this coming greater Exodus before we ever get there. And I want you to look with me in Exodus chapter 13, verse 18. And you'll find some clues hidden here that's pretty interesting. It says, Yahweh led the people about through the way of the wilderness of the Red Sea, and the children of Israel went up harnessed out of the land of Egypt. I have some words emphasized there for you. The words led and about, they're redundant. They're the same Hebrew word. The word through is not even in the original text. So if you were to read it, it would say, but Elohim led the people the way of the wilderness. And I want to concentrate on the two words led and about. So you can see what's happening. He's paid the price. He's got their attention. And we've told you on a number of occasions that the first three plagues fell on Egypt and Israel. It's sort of, they felt compelled to leave. Right? And when we look at what's happening here, the word for led and about, Strong's number 5437, is the word savav. It means a turning around, an encircling, a surrounding. And this is Yahweh speaking. It's literally saying that Yahweh is surrounding or hurting the people just like this to constantly keep the stragglers. Oh, come on. Oh, come on. You got to get back in, get back over here. We always talk about leaving the 99 and go and get the one. My goodness, you realize what a shepherd's job is? Constantly going around herding, and everybody wants the shepherd to be there until they're the one that's being herded. Everybody wants the shepherd to be there to feed you, water you, help you with your ailments, but when you're the one that's trying to straggle and the shepherd's saying, whoop, come back, people don't want that. And then you get a bum rap if you're a pastor or a shepherd. And this is what the word is saying that Yahweh's having to do to the children of Israel. Now, these people were led out of Egypt with a mighty hand, with a strong, stretched out arm. And yet they're still, why do you think they're straggling? You think that they just lost their sense of direction? And they get up one morning and part of the crowd's going this way and part of the crowd's going that way? No, it's because they were wanting to go back to where the comfort zone was. That's what he's trying to do. He's trying to herd them back, to keep them in the camp, to keep them from going back, to returning to the flesh. And that's the problem that I see in the believing community. We're constantly wanting to go back to what we were set free from. And yet we get in the middle of a service like this and we thump our chest and we say, I've been set free. I've been set free. But the rest of the week is kind of like a submarine relationship. You go below the surface and rise to the top on Shabbat. And Abba's trying to tell us that there's something wrong with a roller coaster type relationship. Are you listening to me? I want you to look at that word harnessed. It said that he led the children of Israel out harnessed. And I'm thinking, I've taught on this before. Okay? Get this in your mind. He's kind of herding, shepherding them around. Come back, get back in here. He's leading them out harnessed. And if you've ever studied this, the word for harness there, Strong's number 2571, it's the word kamush. And it's rendered in battle array by fives to be stout. But in my opinion, and a lot of scholars agree, they asked the question, how in the world, and I'm going to say it, how in the world, if Yahweh's having to herd me back and forth to keep me going back into Egypt, how in the world is he going to let me be in the middle of a pitched battle and be trusted with a weapon? Are you listening to what I'm saying? And there's another verse that actually adds more emphasis to that. And let me ask you this. How could they ever have gained weapons and been instructed in warfare when they were in a hostile environment? How many of you have been in the military? You've been in the military in an occupied place where one military occupied another state or another government's military. You didn't want those people that had been conquered having weapons and doing military training. That's why you went in there for the first part, to stop that. Am I right? So how in the world would the children of Israel be able to have all of these weapons, being battle trained, come out in battle array with their chest all stuck out? Yes, hallelujah, we're coming out to do battle. And that's what we all act like. We're going to do some tremendous warfare here. We're spiritual giants. And yet the whole time we're thumping our chest, you're always having to herd you back in. Come on, put the sword down. You're going to cut yourself. Put the sword down. And in my notes there, I have for you, the only reason that Yahweh would give any of us a sharp weapon is so we could circumcise ourselves. I'm just going to tell you. Turn to your neighbor and tell him, your flesh needs to be circumcised. And when Yahweh's given this word to me, I was getting indignant. And I was getting to the point, I'm ready to point my fingers at folks. When you come give it to me, I'll point my finger. I don't like to hear people thumping their chests about their spiritual warfare. I don't like to hear people shouting and prophesying and quoting stuff and posting things on the total police. That just rubs my fur backwards. Get on Facebook and all these social media things and posting all this stuff, especially when I know them. And I know that their life is not what it's not. Wait a minute. He's having to herd you constantly to keep you from going back to Egypt, and you're a spiritual giant, spiritual warrior? Come on, something's wrong here. I get the phone calls. He gets the phone calls. I hear through the grapevine. I know what goes on. I know whose spiritual warfare is genuine, and I know those that have the ability to stand up and their mettle get tested when the hard times come. And I'm telling you, the children of Israel were not capable when they came out of Egypt of being battle tested, and they were not capable of having the weapons of physical warfare in their hands when they couldn't even do the warfare necessary to bring their flesh under control. I'm telling you that. And I'm going to show you what was helping them. See, it wasn't just Israel's fault. Are you hearing me? It was that mixed multitude. You know we got them up in here. Every congregation. The Hebrew Roots movement's filled with a mixed multitude. That's who we have to blame them, because we don't like to do the self-examination. And when I finished today's teaching, we'll close it out, give you an opportunity to repent if there's any, and people will sit there like you knew I was talking about everybody else. Nobody will move, but you know deep down on the inside you've got issues. We've all got issues with what I'm sharing with you right here. Many of us are guilty of strife and envy and backbiting and gossiping and slandering and personal attack and anger, and we're always having to be restructured by Yahweh just to keep us sane and in the count. The mixed multitude went up also with them. Now, when you look at what most scholars say about the mixed multitude, they say, well, it's kind of a conglomerate of Egyptians and maybe some other Arabs nations, and they translate it as a mix, as in a mixed or an interwoven race, and I believe that's hogwash. Say that with me. Hogwash. Because that same word, erev, can also indicate to meddle. An individual likes to just go meddle in your business. Now, I'm already struggling. I'm just going to lay this out. I'm coming out of Egypt. You're here to help me. We're coming out. We've been through hell and high water getting here, ain't we? I'm telling you. And I had a good, cushy job with Pharaoh until Moshe come along. Everything was going along fine. I was at the top of the food chain. I was at the top of the ladder. Everything was going along fine. I know there's some promises of grandeur. We've been hearing Abraham talk about this for 400 years, and here we are. Yeah. We've been hearing this. Nothing's changed. And we decide we're going to follow him and get out, and we're going to bring this mixed multitude. A group of folks comes out with us, and all they're good for is just meddling in my business, stirring the pot. I told somebody at my house this week, I said, you know something? I don't know how I'm going to be. Crap doesn't stink until it gets stirred. Hello? And the moment that you find a person prone to stirring it, it seems like that individual has that wafting. Oh, guess what your ministry is? You're a crap stirrer. Y'all may find this humorous, but the body of Messiah is filled with that. Proverbs 20 verse 19 says, he that goeth about as a talebearer revealeth secrets. Therefore meddle not with him that flattereth with his lips. These are the kinds of people that came out with the children of Israel. They were looking for a free ride. They were probably at the bottom of the food chain in Egypt. Well, see, Israel at least had it good for a while under Joseph. And so these people were probably upset. You know, there's some promises made. If we can follow them, we're going to get a hold of us. If I can just stay in his wake, I'm going to get some of those promises. And and the moment that I see somebody about to be blessed, well, you know, if I'm not blessed myself, then I can get kind of testy. Why is he getting blessed? I don't understand that. So what if Ada and her son works hard and her daughter? So what if they earn what is theirs? I just don't think it's fair. I should have part of it. Well, that's the mindset that the majority of people have today, is that they, in spite of them working for it and earning it, I'm owed that. And so I get jealous. There's that word, jealous and envying, and I begin to speak against them, and that's all working in the camp. No wonder Yahweh himself, forget about poor Moses having to take care of shepherding the flock. I'm surprised that he lived. Yahweh's the one having to go around herding around. Isn't it kind of nice to know that he's the one doing it? In the moment I think, let him go. That's what I've been saying. Let's let him go. Let him go. No, I didn't let you go. And that's right, I was there with them. Does this make sense to you? And so I had to ask myself, look at the company we're keeping. The daily struggle with the flesh is real. Turn to your neighbor and tell him, yes, it's real. Well, then why in heaven's name would you multiply or exacerbate the problem by keeping company with a meddlesome bunch? You're constantly prone to taking your house and opening up your house, whether it's this spiritual house or your place where you live, and you allow stuff to come in. Maybe it's on your job and you allow people to come in and meddle. Can't you just nip it? Like Barney Fife used to say, just nip it. Stop it. You know, that's the quickest way to end it. Just say, stop. Stop. Let's don't tolerate it anymore. But we intend, rather, to just, maybe they're not quite so bad as we think they are. Maybe we just need to tolerate them. If we just be tolerant a little while longer. No, I think Yahweh used the plagues to help extricate us out of Egypt. And I think that the time for tolerating junk is over with. Can you say amen? All we wind up doing is exposing our homes to discord and strife. And I found that as I was looking at this, the wilderness excursion may just be allowed to take place a little longer than necessary in order to purge some meddlers from among us while he's getting the Egypt out of you. And so sometimes you may wonder why Yahweh's allowing you to go through a difficult situation. It may be because he's trying to prune the company you've been keeping. Amen? Well, let me ask you this. Why was it that the children of Israel were coming out of Egypt to begin with? Have you ever asked yourself that? Wasn't that part of the promises made to Abraham? And the promises, if they were made to Abraham and his seed, it's very powerfully plain that anybody that engages in the works of the flesh are not Abraham's seed. And so maybe, can I just lay it out a little bit plainer? Maybe what Yahweh allowed to happen was a group of people come out that were pretending to be seed of Abraham, pretending to be part of the house, and maybe he had to allow them to go through the difficult times of the wilderness excursion in order to separate the wheat from the chaff, the tares from the wheat. Maybe that's what he's allowing to happen, so that we can see who's Abraham's seed and who's not. Because only Abraham's seed are going to inherit the promises. If you have a difficult time with that, listen to Galatians 3, verse 9 through 11. So then, they which be of faith are blessed with faithful Abraham. For as many as are of the works of the law are under the curse of the law. For it's written, cursed is everyone that continueth not in all things which are written in the book of the law, the Torah, to do them. But that the law in the sight of Yahweh justifies no man. It is evident, for the just shall live by faith. And so I had to go back and address this group of people that we've been taught came out of Egypt in battle array when they're struggling with all of their flesh. And they've got a group of meddlesome, complaining individuals along with them. All of them are struggling with a slave mentality. How in the heaven's name could they have been battle ready? And in fact, Exodus chapter 13, verse 17 tells that Yahweh took them a different route. Rather than go by the highway of the Philistines, he took them to a different way, because if they were to see war, they might regret leaving Egypt and seek to return. Now, wait. Let's just figure this out. If they came out harnessed and battle prepared and battle ready, then why would Yahweh say, we can't take them that way? Because if we take them that way, they're going to see war and they'll regret leaving Egypt and want to go back. You see what I'm asking you now? I believe that there's a lot going on here besides what you've been taught previously regarding this word chamash or chamush. Who are Abraham's seed? Those that walk in the flesh, right? No. It says, though we walk in the flesh, we do not war after the flesh. 1 Corinthians 10, verse 3 through 6 says, for the weapons of our warfare are not carnal, but mighty through Yahweh to the pulling down of strongholds, casting down imaginations and every high thing that exalts itself against the knowledge of Elohim, and bringing into captivity every thought to the obedience of Messiah, and having in a readiness, listen to this, being ready to revenge all other disobedience when your own obedience is fulfilled. How can I exact revenge on those who are disobedient to the plan of Yahweh when my own obedience has not been fulfilled? You see, there's a major conundrum going on in the body of Messiah. Hello? Well, it's my opinion that the evidence is overwhelming that Israel came out of Egypt, no longer slaves to Egypt. They were no longer slaves to Egypt. They were slaves to their flesh. So there has to be another explanation for that phrase. And I believe that the King James translators actually intentionally did this to throw you off, to get you to think that you can do great spiritual warfare and great physical battle and yet be carnal-minded and prone to the lust of the flesh. I say you can't. I didn't hear any amens. Somebody must have been struggling with that. There's a simple vowel change, same Hebrew letters. Kamashah is a phrase that indicates 1 out of 5. And so is it possible that only 1 out of 5 of the children of Israel actually left Egypt? I believe so. I believe that that's the case. You find Yahweh having to herd the stragglers because those that came out of Egypt were constantly looking back at their family members and all of the legacy, all of the things that were left, all the stuff. Wish we had the leeks and the onions. How many of you ever said that? I wish we could get some watermelons and sweet potatoes and collard greens. Hallelujah. It's interesting because I'm convinced that this is what's happening. And then we're told, as soon as that's said, that it tells us that Moshe took the bones of Joseph with him. And I had to ask myself, why is it even mentioning the bones of Joseph when this whole stage has been set to give me the inclination that this is a dysfunctional group of people that came out of Egypt? I got news for you. If only 1 out of 5 came out, the odds are against you of even getting out of Egypt, much less making it through. Are you hearing me? Turn to your neighbor and tell them the odds are against us. So we got to walk according to the Spirit, not after the flesh, if we're expecting to make it. And in verse 19 of chapter 13, it says, and Moshe took the bones of Joseph with him. That word is pretty interesting. In Hebrew, it's the word lechak. It means to take, to receive, to acquire, to marry, to take a wife. The first time you see it used is all the way back there in Genesis chapter 2, verse 21, where it says that Yahweh took a rib bone, if you will, of Adam to build his wife, the bones indicating the DNA of the man. You remember that? But what I want you to do, I want you to look at that verse with me. Genesis chapter 2, verse 21b, and you're going to see something that you probably have not seen before. It says, and he took one of his ribs and he closed up the flesh instead thereof. And this is going to connect with him taking the bones of Joseph out of Egypt, all right? You need to remember, Joseph was the first seed of Israel planted in Egypt, right? And we've been told that Yahweh sent his son Yeshua. Out of Egypt I have called my son. And so Yeshua goes down into Egypt as well, right? The same word for took, that word lakak, can also indicate, listen to this, this is powerful, learning, instruction, insight, and understanding that is received. In other words, Adam, while he's laying here and Yahweh's extricating the DNA, Yahweh's speaking some instruction, some insight, and understanding into the Adam. And then he's giving Adam the ability to turn around and later to dispense the same himself. And so he's downloading something into the Adam as he's taken part of Adam's DNA out to create this woman. In fact, it says one is the word, one for ribs there is one, it's the word ikad. Excuse me, my mind's getting jumbled up. It's the word ikad, which means a plural unity. And so it's indicating that what's happening is that Yahweh is speaking into the Adam. He's downloading into Adam, and he's preparing Adam for something that is about to transpire. We'll look at that. I believe you'll be able to see it. The word for rib is the word zelah, and it indicates a stumbling, a fall, or a slipping. And then you have the word for the phrase closed up is the word kagar, which means to shut something off, to imprison, and to repair, to deliver over to something or to someone. And you have the word for flesh, which is basar, defined as flesh, but it also indicates to bear news, good news, to preach, to announce salvation, to make something fresh. Is it possible that while Adam is lying on the ground, Yahweh's reaching into him and extricating his DNA, that he's also speaking into the Adam while extracting Chava from his DNA, and he's telling him of a future stumbling, a fall, and he's letting him know that there would be a remedy, a repair, and that his, Adam's flesh, would be delivered over to another, the Messiah, and he would be planted, the Messiah would be planted into this Chava, into this woman. She becomes the Mitzrayim. She becomes the womb of pressure and stress that the Messiah is planted into, just like Joseph was planted into Mitzrayim, just like the house of Israel was planted into Mitzrayim. And she would bear in him, she would bear in his body, announce salvation and redemption for that flesh. And as I said earlier, Joseph, just like Yeshua, would be planted in Egypt. And the word for Mitzrayim is a plural of the word Matsur. The mem prefix indicates the womb, while the zadi vav resh zur indicates to besiege or to distress, to be in distress. The living DNA of the Aleph Tav would be planted in a distressed womb called Miriam, just like the seed of Abraham was planted into the womb of Egypt. And when you see Yahweh telling the children of Israel that we're bringing out the bones of Joseph in Exodus 13, verse 19, that phrase, the bones, is Aleph Tav Etzmot, the Aleph Tav bones. Even though we're looking figuratively at the bones of Joseph, there's something in the seed of the bones of Joseph which indicates I'm going to do something again. There's going to be a conception. There's going to be a gathering again. There was a promise that had been given to Yahweh, been given by Yahweh to Abraham and to Abraham's children, to Joseph and to the house of Israel. And as I said earlier, we forget that Joseph was the seed that was planted in Egypt. He was the first of the house of Israel sent there. And it's interesting because he becomes the code word. Joseph becomes a code word for the future deliverance of Israel. And how many of you have ever looked at the numeric value of Yosef? It's 156, the same value as the phrase Ohel Moed, the tent of meeting. Joseph's bones was the body that had been built for Yahweh's habitations. Joseph's bones, just like the bones, the spiritual bones of Adam used to create Chava, became the beams, the construction material for the future dwelling place. And so Joseph becomes a shadow picture of Messiah. And those that would come out of Egypt would have to come out by the way of Joseph, emulating Joseph, going into bondage, learning how to bring his flesh under control, learning how to be obedient to Yahweh's word, learning how to function as a servant to the Most High. And it's the same shadow picture of our Messiah, Yeshua. Does that make sense? And the rabbis teach us that Joseph actually gave a code phrase upon his deathbed when he declares that Yahweh would surely visit Pakad Yifkad, and that this code phrase was given to Moshe so that he would be able to be identified by the house of Israel as the one who was coming to deliver them. Now this is interesting because surely visit, Pakad Yifkad, is defined, listen to this, as to attend, to appoint, to observe, to number, to be mindful of, and to count. And it's used 37 times throughout the Tanakh in such instances as remembering Sarah. And it hints at far more than just counting or remembering. Listen to this. It emphasizes that all or everyone who needs to be there is accounted for. The children of Israel may have only 1 out of 5 come out, but everyone that's supposed to come out was accounted for. It emphasizes that all or everyone who needs to be there is accounted for. In other words, no one would be left behind. Is that what Moshe said? Inferring that the people have the opportunity, but the choice is theirs to accept that opportunity or not. And it's plainly stated in Matthew 22:14, many are called, but few are chosen. The children of Israel had the opportunity to come out of Egypt. Everyone that, whether they were a mixed multitude or not, could have come underneath the umbrella, the auspices of Yahweh's benevolence, could have had access to the inheritance just as surely as Abraham, Moshe, Joseph, Jacob, David. It's for whosoever will, but it's an indicator that you have to be qualified by being obedient to the word of Yahweh. And you cannot, listen to me, you cannot live a carnal, lustful life and be considered the seed of Abraham. It just does not work. That word pakad is pretty interesting. It has a numeric value of 184. You look at its simple numeric value, 1 plus 8 plus 4, 13. It's the value of the word echad, a union that is one. The promise of redemption, deliverance should have produced a unified house. Think about that. All of the plagues that fell on Israel and Egypt, knowing what was in front of them, they knew the very day that they came out that it had been prophesied, and it should have produced a unified house, but the flesh refuses redemption. Did you hear what I just said? The flesh refuses redemption. The odds are against you. If what is revealed above is true, then the odds of leaving Egypt to begin with are overwhelmingly against us. Of those who did leave, the vast majority never made it to the promised inheritance. Only 2 men above 20 years old at the time they left Egypt actually made it in, Joshua and Caleb. And if you recall the partial title, Bishlach, it has a numeric value of 340, the same as the Hebrew word for sefer or sefer. And it's another word similar to the word pakad because it indicates to number, to count, to take a census. In fact, the Sefer Torah, or Book of the Law, was originally written in the heavens, and Yahweh reminded Abraham that he was to count, to number, that a book of remembrance regarding his seed would be written in the stellar heavens, and I'm convinced that Abraham was shown the exact number of individuals that would leave to go down in Egypt, the exact number of individuals that would come out of Egypt, the exact number that would fall in the wilderness, and the exact number that would cross over the river Jordan, because Yahweh's faithful to his promises. If you can just hold fast to yours. And so you have to ask yourself, when you hear these kinds of teaching, it's almost disheartening. Is there any hope for us? The odds are against us. How can we deal with the flesh? How can we overcome? Yahweh's got a remedy for you. Isaiah 43 verse 26, it says, if you've got a problem, put me in remembrance of my word. He says, let us plead together. That word plead there literally means to litigate. You've got a courtroom in eternity where if you've got an issue that you can feel like you could be justified in that issue, you can bring it before Yahweh, and then you can say fair. You can declare it that you might be justified. That word justified is sadak, which means to have a just cause and be vindicated from wrong. And so if the flesh is giving you an issue and you're doing everything that you can to step on it and keep the flesh under submission, then you can go into the courtroom of creation and say, Abba, I ask your forgiveness, I repent, and I'm no longer going to walk after the flesh. I'm going to walk according to the Spirit. Whatever this is that I'm dealing with, whether it's a generational thing, and you can go and look at some of the things that's happened in your family. You can see that there are some generational curses that are grandfathered down to us. You can see that there are generational curses that are assigned to localities. Some cities have some peculiar spiritual carnal atmospheres over them. Some states have peculiar carnal atmospheres over them. You can literally sense it when you go into those areas. But what are we going to do if we're ever expecting to come out of Egypt? The same thing that Joshua and Caleb did. In Joshua chapter 1:8, Joshua was spoke to by Yahweh himself, and he said, this book of the law shall not depart. That word for depart there is the word mush. And it comes from a root word indicating to feel and to touch and to handle. When I read that, I was thinking of Yochanan when he would lean on the breast of Messiah and he could hear the heartbeat of creation thundering in his ears. And it said regarding the Messiah that we touched him and we felt him, we handled him. When's the last time that we were really intimate with him? This book of the law shall not depart out of your mouth, but thou shalt meditate. The word for meditate is hagah. It means to utter, to speak, to imagine, to murmur. This is an entirely different kind of murmuring than the bickering and complaining that Israel were engaged in when they were coming out of Egypt. This is a kind of murmuring where you have the word of Yahweh. Vehu mehoah mepeshainu. Meduka me'avonatenu, musar shelamenu alav, uvahavurato nirpalana. He was bruised for our iniquities. The chastisement of our peace was upon him. The stripes that he received caused us to be healed. You need to learn how to speak those things into existence in your own line, prophesying those things. The word hagah has the same value, 13, as the word pakad. Meditating on Torah brings unity. You want to know why there's so much strife and division and contention and jealousies and emulations and lasciviousness and pornography and all of those other 17 works of the flesh in that house that's coming out of Egypt, that house that's delivered with a great hand, no hand greater than the hand that allowed our Messiah to be extended on an execution stake, none greater than that. And yet here we are. We murmur and we bicker. And instead of meditating on the Torah and Yahweh's Word, we spend more time concerned with the predicament that we find ourselves currently in. And Yahweh is going to deal with that very shortly. He says therein, day and night, that thou mayest observe to do according to all that is written, for then shalt thou make thy way prosperous, and then thou shalt have good success. I believe this is a word for us. I've had a difficult time getting it out today, and I understand that. But I hope that the word took deep root inside you, because I know this is a word for us as a company of believers. Yahweh wants us set free. I don't want to be 1 out of 5. There's 7 people in my house. So that means 1 out of the 7, and maybe one of those other 2 might make it. Did you hear what I just said? Front row, 5. One of y'all is going to make it in. Second row, 5. I saw that hand, Ada. She just give up. I just give up. Second row, 5 of you. 1 out of 5. Look at there. Third row, 5. You see what I'm saying? We came out, Hamashah. 1 out of 5. I don't want that. I don't want the odds against us. I want Yahweh's word working on our behalf, and I believe he wants us set free. And whom the Son sets free is free indeed. Can you say amen? Amen.